When did you start incorporating AI into what you do as a company and the consulting you give to others?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, it's been an amazing 18-year ride for the company. And, you know, I think it was interesting for us because we were one of the first companies to move to the cloud. And at the time, that was very new for the type of work that we were doing. And there were a lot of incumbent questions upon us from customers about, is the data secure? Can it be trusted? And so some of those bedrock principles that we founded at the start of the company hold very much true as we've started to make forays into AI over the last number of few years, especially in 2019. We had
So on the timeline, the cloud, I think we all understand now. When did you actually formalize the use of AI into your own company and what you advise to others?
Yeah, I want to follow up with making sure it doesn't predate the data I'm going to give you, but 2018, 2019 was a time when we started developing machine learning-based algorithms to deliver capabilities. That's also when we started working on what would become a lot of the NIST-based AI risk management frameworks to go along with that work. And
you're on the leading edge of it, so that's 3 to 4, maybe 5 years. And the distance we've traveled, that's amazing. So begs the question, since you're on the leading edge of it, and we generally will always hear about what good comes from it, are there any examples of where, even in your own company or with businesses that have incorporated it, have gotten ahead of their skis and had issues with it?
None of significance, but I think we are so leaning into a prevailing concern with our experience that we could introduce risk, especially in terms of bias and discrimination into the workplace. And so, and I think that's most pronounced for us as we start to evaluate some of these generative AI technologies. One of the things that a lot of our first generation AI was good at was like predicting financial numbers, doing math. Does your payroll add up?
The low-hanging fruit.
The low-hanging fruit. And now we're talking about AI systems that can write business documents, evaluate contracts, really do a lot.
So fair to say we're on the cusp of all the potential that might be good ahead of us, but a lot of the potential issues, which would beg the kind of a general regulatory framework, are just coming to the surface.
I think that is true, and I agree that, you know, we're a company that's very accustomed to working in regulated environments with a lot of different compliance regimes, cybersecurity, FedRAMP, many of these things. We're comfortable with that, but what it really hurts when you have a mishmash of different approaches, and having something uniform at a national level and allowing the U.S. to take leadership in this area is really important. A lot of our businesses operate at a global level, and so the more we can have a simplified, smart set of regulations, the more benefit we'll have. And I think, you know, those benefits will accrue to all nature of businesses.
Mr. Billingsley, when you take what we just talked about there, and then you relate it to entrepreneurs wanting to capitalize on it, we've seen cryptocurrency being something a little bit amorphous recently in terms of the volatility of it. Number one, what is your concern about everything we've discussed here in terms of entrepreneurs who generally are a little less risk averse, plowing into a field where they'd, you know, want to build a company when there are so many inherent uncertainties around it?
Thank you for the question. I actually think this is why the conversation around workforce is critical. Because when we talk about how you're going to use AI, if it's going to be the bedrock of the new economy, that's both in terms of workforce and entrepreneurship. In a lot of ways, some of the best entrepreneurs are people who spent a long time in the field, you know, learning a specific skill, and then they branch out and start their own companies. So when you talk about risk-averse entrepreneurs, yes, some will jump up and start companies without any background, but if we create the correct framework for people to learn and be trained with AI AI in the workforce, we're actually training up some more responsible people who have more fluent skills in terms of AI. So when they start perhaps AI-enabled businesses and companies, they can use them more responsibly, they can use them more effectively, because they'll have the reference point of what they learned and how they saw it administrated when they were in the workforce.
You know, I look back to the dot-com craze as an analog based upon just technology in general, and look at the number of companies that flamed out in a short period of time back then, and look now how important that has been in terms of woven into almost every aspect. So I think that was a lot less concerning then, but when you do get a hot new technology, entrepreneurs generally not being risk averse, this to me almost looks like it's more full of potential pitfalls than what we would have had back 2 decades ago.
Absolutely. I think that's the inherent nature of how AI should be approached. You know, when you've got a tool, I always use the analogy, you know, 2 kids, you know, hitting each other with pillows is one thing, but if they ended up having an actual weapon, the amount of times you have to get it wrong is 1. So when we think about specifically high growth companies who are going to integrate AI and end up using it for solutions that are critical for, you know, whether it be loan applications and critical decisions, you don't have very many times to get it right before it becomes a serious problem. So, you know, the reference and initial framework is more critical than it's ever been.
Thank you.
Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And now, Mr. Newman, I'm going to get to you since I dealt with my other 3 witnesses in the first round. First, I was intrigued with one aspect of your testimony that was cryptic and unexplained. I think I know what you mean, but I wanted to ask you about it. I'm not part of any lobbying special interest or industry group. I'm here as a concerned citizen and father. Why'd you throw father into your testimony?
I have 5 children, and the world they're coming into is going to be impacted from a 24-hour cycle, asleep, awake, all the way back to asleep by AI. And I am concerned. I know firsthand the tremendous upside AI offers in every use case, including the workforce. And again, by DNA, I'm anti-regulation. But AI, from what I've seen behind the scenes, from those developing it and innovating it, they mean well, they're doing the best they can, but this is an area for the health, welfare, and safety of society. I believe the federal government ought to provide rules of the road.
And it sounds like from listening to your testimony, reading it, but also listening to in the Q&A, that your belief in federal regulation sort of is justified by 2 pillars. One is there would be danger of differing state-level regulatory schemes that could choke off innovation, that could create huge problems for the development of this industry, that could put us at a strategic disadvantage with other nations. So the one justification for a federal framework is to avoid needless complexity and contradictory state-level regulation. But then the second level is sort of on the more affirmative side. You think that there are aspects where we could advance good and put up guardrails against bad by doing the federal level regulation. And one item in the 3rd page of your testimony where you go over the sort of your 5 points about the different sections intrigued me. Section 202 creates a federal worker realignment program to aid covered individuals displaced by AI by training such individuals for alternative careers and by helping such individuals find employment opportunities. We have an analog to that in trade adjustment assistance. So for a long while, we have had federal programs to focus resources on individuals and communities if trade has disrupted something that they've counted on as a pillar of the economy. Until I read your testimony, I had not heard someone suggest the same thing from those displaced by AI or other technological advancements. My experience as a mayor and governor before I got here is that more people lose jobs to technology changes than to trade. But with trade, there's somebody you can blame. You can blame the person who negotiated the trade deal. A job has gone overseas. There might be a plant with a lock on it. It's easy to blame, whereas we don't really want to blame technology because we all like carrying around the latest version of these. And so we tend not to focus so much upon the dislocations in the workforce caused by technology. But I thought that was an interesting proposal, and thinking about it kind of connected to trade adjustment assistance, I found it to be a creative one. You want to expand on that?
Yes, I have had this debate with many of folk. Is AI the cotton gin? And are we Luddites? And will there be more jobs created? And yes, there'll be some jobs created. But let me take my profession as an example. And maybe it's a good thing, but there are going to be less lawyers, okay? There's tremendous private equity and venture capital being deployed to create AI solutions in the law. And they're going to be amazingly effective in doing things better than the human can do in the law. Now, with our rule of law system, we always need humans. And there's going to be, in my view, you don't want AI judges, AI juries. But in the day-to-day practice of law, there are going to be less lawyers, less paralegals, less admins. And there isn't going to be a re-entry into the workforce for a lot of these folks with their skill set. So I do come out on the side that AI is fundamentally different than all that's come before, and the impact on the workforce will be different, and there will ultimately, in my view, be dislocation on a different level than we've seen before. And I do think one aspect, if the federal government is eventually going to legislate this, is not only providing for something like a chief AI officer and the necessity for one, and having an AI board like we have the SEC, the FDA, et cetera, or the NLRB or the EEOC. But I think we're going to need a worker retraining program that's federally funded that allows workers of various skill sets to have a way to re-enter the workforce in some way if they're displaced by AI.
Let the record show Mr. Billingsley was emphatically nodding his head yes on that last point. So I think that's an important thing for us to hear. I appreciate it.
Great question, and appreciate the answer. I've got a quick questions. I know that I'm standing between you and freedom, and perhaps your lunch. So let me see the first question I want. Ms. Morley-Ryan, your recent, or Accenture's recent Life Trends report states that technology today feels like it's happening to people, not for them. What does your research indicate about the skills that workers are seeking out to help them understand and leverage AI, and how can adequate skills training help workers to regain and restore their sense of trust in the workplace? And then, Mr. Billingsley, I'm going to ask you to comment on this as well.
Yeah, I think the question, thank you for that question, Senator. I think the question has sort of my answer will have two parts. One is we focus a lot on the hard skills, sort of what is AI, what does this technology do, how can I use it? What Accenture's found through our extensive work with our own people and the $1 billion a year that we invest in our own learning, as well as our client conversations and engagement in the community, is that it's just as important to have what I would call sort of the support to build a culture of learning, right? Growth mindset, self-efficacy, agency for that learner, to have choice as to say what job is going to be their next job, and giving them an opportunity to make that choice. So I think there's a component of sort of the hard skills piece, if that makes sense, from an availability, but then also recognizing what we know about human behavior, cognitive science and neuroscience, about how people learn, so that we provide opportunities that and training programs and learning programs that allow and are based in that knowledge. Yeah.
Good.
That's it.
Mr. Billingsley?
Absolutely. I would echo those sentiments. You know, in my community, we have a saying called, "What you do for me, without me, you do to me." And I think that's often the entire approach of, you know, these technological revolutions, or, to be frank, even sometimes when regulation is handed down. I think that this new age of AI that we're in is also an opportunity for us to take a far more community-focused approach when it comes to not only figuring out what are the right decisions to make, but how are things actually going to affect people in real time. Engaging workers, engaging community members, and exposing them to this technology, to go back to that point, exposing them to this technology in two different tracks, one that is more framed in terms of how they might apply it in workforce, but another that's more general that helps people specifically in communities of color, many of whom have a really terrifying view of AI that gets them to develop a culture that they're more comfortable with it. They can adopt it, but also they can see using it as a remedy to so many of the stumbling blocks that they've often faced, both in the workforce or in everyday life. The culture and the social systems we build around AI are equally as important as the technology. For most people, it's more important because most people aren't on the fringes to be able to influence how the technology actually works fundamentally. But for most of us, it's these systems we develop. So that's where most of the energy needs to go, and it needs to be human and people focused.
Right, got that. And then on that same similar slant, Mr. Newman, I thought, we all have a vested interest in protecting the rights of workers, especially their civil rights. And you were talking about this universal opportunity for retraining workers, which I think really makes a lot of sense. All of you have said a version of that along here. Mr. Newman, in your experience, what are some of the factors that should weigh that employers should be thinking about when considering AI implementation to really help make sure the workers are included and at the same time protected, but really included as well? Just, I think, sort of what Mr. Billingsley was saying.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Chairman. The framework that all companies should aspire to who deploy AI, whether large or small, is to have either by name or the equivalent a chief AI officer. And one of their responsibilities will be to educate and disclose transparently to the workforce what AI systems are being used in the workplace that can affect your hire, your fire, your promotion, your identification for promotion, job selection, etc. And by being transparent in that way as one facet of the chief AI officer's job, it takes a lot of the fear and uncertainty away. And the workforce can see that they're not being treated unfairly by AI because they understand what's happening. It's the black box approach. It's we are using it in ways we're not showing you to spy and harm you, versus very responsible ways to use AI in the employment context that ought to be disclosed, and workers should understand what's happening.
Right. No, excellent points made. My last question for Mr. Lannon, although you could all, every one of you could have answered every one of these questions. It's such a great panel. There are a number of ways that AI obviously can enhance workplace processes. You've all described this. You promote efficiencies, make workers more productive, make their lives easier in many cases. This could go too far, and we run the risk of relying too much on AI, I think potentially at the expense of human decision-making. And imagine decision-making being a muscle that atrophies. So Mr. Lannon, how are developers thinking about the need to balance advances in AI without losing sight of the critical analytic decision-making capability?
When we think about developing AI into our products, we need to think about what outcomes we're going to achieve as part of that process. Is it going to have an impact on the hiring we're doing? Is it going to have an impact on another part of the workforce? If we understand the outcomes, then we can understand where human judgment comes to play most. And we can think about AI as that co-pilot that allows someone to be more informed in their judgment. And so I think it starts with really assessing what are the key parts of any piece of work that matter the most, where we rely on that fundamental ability to make good decisions, and we can augment them as sort of a foundation point. Yes, AI will show up in lots of simple, nondescript ways across the products. It'll recommend a song that's pretty innocuous, but there are many places in the work that we do where human decision-making matters. It was a great point around the legal profession, for sure. We want our judges and our jurors to be human beings that are applying their judgment. And so I think that analogy holds for all kinds of different professions. And that's how I think about it is what's the outcome we're driving? And if you think holistically about that, it's easy to arrive at the places we need to keep people at the center.
Great. And that's, I think, where you started, was keeping people at the center. More questions?
I'm good.
All right. I think, not that I'm out of questions, but I think that I will back off at the moment. But I really, I can't thank you all enough for taking the time to be here. I think this has been so illuminating in so many ways, and I feel so optimistic. Not that there aren't serious risks that you guys have all laid out, but that it's, and I am an optimist. Entrepreneurs, you can't be in small business. These days, you can't be in government if you're not somewhat of an optimist. And I think I come away from this feeling that more hopeful than fearful. Anyway, that will end our hearing today. I'd like to thank the colleagues who are here and watching on the Zoom and the internet. I want to thank each of our witnesses, Mr. Billingsley, Mr. Lannon, Ms. Mobley-Ryan, Ms. Newman, Morley-Ryan, Morley-Ryan, and Mr. Newman. Again, words can't express how much I appreciate having such a wide arc of experience to help us work through this stuff. For any senators that wish to ask additional questions or have questions that weren't asked today, questions for the record will be due within 10 business days, so on Tuesday, November 15th at 5 p.m. So ordered. The committee now stands adjourned.